Moss Hollow, Arkansas. April 2002. Caleb Hart, a retired soldier who had spent 15 years on the battlefield, had finally put war behind him. He and his wife, Nora, a gentle, kind-hearted nurse, had moved into a decaying old house at the very end of Red Fern Road. But within 3 days, Caleb broke open a discolored section of the attic wall and dragged out a trunk wrapped tight in electrical tape. Inside were a pair of worn baby shoes, a photo of 3 children, and a scrawled message: "That girl isn't coming back." That night, from the shed behind the yard, came a sound, as if something or someone was being called to rise. Before we dive in, let us know where you're reading from and rate the story from 1 to 10. Thanks for being here. Let's begin. Moss Hollow, Arkansas, April 2002. Caleb Hart dropped his worn-out military-issue duffel bag by the wooden doorframe and sighed, taking in the sight of the small house he and his wife had just bought from the bank. The place, at the end of Red Fern Road, looked like it had been forgotten deep in the pine woods for the better part of 2 decades. But Caleb didn't mind. The quiet here was a hell of a lot better than the sound of artillery fire or helicopters buzzing overhead. Nora Hart climbed out of their pickup truck, wiping her hands on the hem of her gray cardigan sweater. "All right, you get the rest of the boxes, and I'll see if there's anything salvageable in the kitchen." Caleb nodded. His gaze drifted across the overgrown backyard to an old wooden shed, its rusted tin roof barely visible through the trees. He frowned involuntarily, but said nothing. They were starting over. Even the old, broken-down stuff deserved a chance. The house had 3 bedrooms, a small attic, and floorboards that creaked like crazy with every step. Caleb decided to check out the ventilation system up in the attic. He grabbed a flashlight, hammer, and drywall knife and headed up. Nora followed, helping him clear out cobwebs and boxes left behind by the previous owner. That's when Caleb noticed a section of wall paneling that was a different color than the rest. The nails holding it in place weren't the same either. Old, rough iron nails that didn't match the standard issue hardware used after the 90s. Caleb tapped on it gently. It sounded hollow. "Hey, hon, hand me the crowbar. Something's up with this panel." Nora passed him the crowbar and stepped back. "Be careful. Don't go wrecking our brand new ceiling." Caleb pried carefully. The panel popped loose. There was a dry thump as something fell down right at Nora's feet. She gasped and recoiled. Caleb shined his flashlight. Lying on the dusty floor was a metal trunk, maybe 1.5 feet long, wrapped in an old, discolored wool blanket and bound tight with black electrical tape. The rust on it looked almost like dried blood. Caleb bent down for a closer look. There was no lock, but the trunk was sealed shut with a twisted wire that was pulled incredibly tight. It took him nearly 5 minutes to get it undone. When they opened the lid, both of them fell silent. Inside were a pair of tiny cream-colored baby shoes, yellowed with age, with the name Emmy stitched on the inside. A porcelain barrette was broken at one corner. A faded black and white photograph showed 3 little girls standing on the porch of a wood frame house with a maple tree in the background, and a small piece of paper, torn at the edges with a scrawled message: "Emmy won't be coming home." Caleb exhaled and closed the trunk. Could just be an old prank, or some toys. Nora stared at the photograph. "Do you know what porch this is? That tree in the background? That's the maple tree in our front yard." Caleb looked again. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is. But this picture's gotta be old." Nora flipped the photo over. The writing was faded, but still legible. 8/15/87, front of Red Fern House. Caleb rubbed his forehead. 87. That's like 15 years before we moved in. This isn't normal, Caleb. He didn't answer right away, but when Nora put the shoes and the photo into a separate canvas bag, he didn't object. Nora's instincts were usually better than he wanted to admit. They spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking, rearranging furniture, and replacing electrical outlets. Caleb rechecked the plumbing. Nora cleaned up the living room. But every few minutes, her eyes would dart back to the staircase leading up to the attic. As evening fell, while Caleb was checking an outlet on the front porch, Nora went alone to the backyard to gather some firewood. As she neared the shed, a cold gust of wind blew through, causing the shed door to rattle softly. And then, tap, tap. The sound was very faint, distinct. Not the wind, not a mouse. She stood still for a few seconds, tilting her head. Tap, 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 3 taps. Silence, tap, tap. Nora backed away. She turned and hurried back to the house, slamming the door shut behind her. Caleb? I heard something in the shed. After the metal trunk appeared like a whisper from the past, Nora barely slept that night. The tap, tap she heard so clearly from the direction of the shed still echoed in her ears, repeating, separated by even beats, as if someone were signaling from somewhere underground. Caleb had searched around the house before dawn, but found nothing unusual. No mice, no wind, no engine noises or wires hitting the walls. Nora said, "It wasn't a normal noise, Caleb. I'm sure of it." He just nodded, neither dismissing her nor trying to comfort her. As usual, Caleb didn't say anything until he was sure. By noon, Nora drove alone to the public library in Jasper, the only place that still kept microfilm archives from before 1990. She took the faded photograph found in the trunk. 3 children standing stiffly in front of a house. Behind them, the wooden porch identical to the house they were now in. In the blurry corner of the photo, it said, 8/15/87, front of Red Fern House. Nora went to the librarian's desk and took out the photograph. The old woman, wearing glasses on a chain, looked at the photo for a few seconds, then frowned. Good heavens. This is the Green Hollow case, isn't it? Her voice was almost a whisper. What's Green Hollow? Nora asked. The librarian stepped out from the counter without saying more, leading Nora to a row of old microfilm readers. She took out a reel labeled 1987 Jasper County News, slotted it into the machine, and fast-forwarded to August 17th. The old news report came up on the black and white screen, distorted. 3 girls disappear from Green Hollow Camp. No trace. Nobody saw anything. The article was short, just a few paragraphs. No photos, no interviews with relatives. It named the 3 girls: Anna Delaney, 10 years old; Bethany Cooper, 11 years old; Carla Monroe, 9 years old. According to reports, all 3 were attending a summer camp organized by the town, in the woods to the north, known as Green Hollow Camp. The girls were in the same group, sleeping in the same tent, and disappeared on the night of August 15th, 1987. Nobody saw anything. Nobody heard screaming. The next morning, the camp leader reported it. The police searched, dived into the stream, searched the forest. No trace. Nora took photos of the screen, noting all the details. When the librarian saw the name, Anna Delaney, She put her hand gently on Nora's shoulder. "That child, redhead, I remember it. No one believed they were abducted. Everyone said they'd run away together. The police wanted to wrap it up quickly." Nora brought all the information back and told Caleb while he was cleaning up the shed out in the yard. When he heard the name Anna Delaney, Caleb stopped and asked, "Does that name match the writing on the shoes?" "Yes." "And in the photo is the same child." Nora confirmed. That same evening, Caleb started to look up old police files through the Newton County Public Records Archive, more than an hour's drive from their house. Since the computer systems back then weren't standardized, most of the investigation records were paper copies that had been scanned in. In the summary files, he found an internal investigation report into the disappearance of the 3 girls. After reading it once, Caleb frowned. The main points included no signs of forced entry or abduction, no strange footprints found around the campsite, no bodies recovered, no evidence of a crime, high probability that the children left the camp on their own, possible they hitched a ride with a delivery truck or an acquaintance. Caleb was quiet for a moment. In his mind, he replayed reports he had written on the battlefield. Dry reportage. Drafted to close a case, not to investigate. He said, "Those kids didn't leave on their own. Not into the forest, not diving into a stream. And there's no way that 3 little girls wouldn't have left a single trace if they'd left the camp in the middle of the night." Nora asked, "Who do you think put the children into the same group?" The question made Caleb stop. He turned back to the camp group registers. Each camper came from a different school, unusual because, according to the organization principles, children would be put into groups according to school to make management easier. Caleb looked again at the camper list. At the end of the page, in the special group allocation section, was a small line. Group 7, Supervision, Raymond G. Nora frowned. Raymond G? Caleb was silent for a moment. Then he breathed slowly and replied, Raymond Gable. They compared the locations of different points around the campsite, the canteen, the bathrooms, Group 7 tent, the bonfire area, and finally, the stream which was written about in the report as the place where the children could have slipped and fallen. Caleb sat down on the wooden floor, laid out the map, and started to mark each point with a red pen. This stream barely reaches ankle height. If one of them fell in, the other 2 would have screamed. But the report said that no one heard anything. He took the pen and drew a straight line from the Group 7 tent heading north. That was the way out of the camp, cutting through the forest towards Red Fern Road, which was where the house they were living in now was. They didn't go missing in the camp. They were led away, and the person who led them away most likely lived in this house. When the 2 returned home at 10 p.m., it was completely dark. Nora got out of the car, but didn't lock the door before stopping. "Caleb," she whispered. He immediately looked up instinctively. Nora wasn't looking towards the forest. She was looking towards the shed, about 20 meters from them, with no lights. Only a small path of dirt leading towards it. "Can you hear it?" she asked. Caleb held his breath and turned his ear. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. Clearly, there were 5 tapping sounds, repeating in a fixed rhythm. Not a mouse, not the wind, not machinery. Caleb held Nora's hand tightly and said softly, "Someone is in there." 2 days after the strange tapping, Nora suggested Caleb call the police, but he refused. If we're not sure where it's coming from, and we don't have any proof, they'll think you're paranoid because of the old house," Caleb said. And he wasn't wrong. With the experience of someone who'd been involved in dozens of hostage rescue operations, Caleb knew that to reveal something hidden for so many years, you couldn't just rely on intuition. You needed confirmation. Solid. Clear. At 8:00 a.m. that day, Caleb drove to the Newton County Commercial Bank, the place holding the deed to the old house on Red Fern. He brought the certificate of ownership issued by the law office after he bought the house. His purpose was simple: to find out the name of the previous owner and as much information as possible. The records clerk handed him a thin folder. On the first page was the name, Raymond Elmer Gable. Born in 1947, residing in Red Fern from 1988. Transferred ownership in 2001 for reason unoccupied. Moved away for medical reasons. Under relatives, it read, none, no contact information, no heirs. Caleb tapped his fingers on the table. He lived there for 13 years. No one ever asked about him. No one inherited the property, and he left no trace of relatives. Caleb found that unsettling. That noon, he went over to talk to Mr. Lester, the only neighbor who lived next to them and the longest-standing resident in the Red Fern area. Mr. Lester was over 70 years old, used to be an electrician, and had been in a wheelchair since an accident at a substation. "Do you know who the previous owner of my house was?" Caleb asked while helping to clear away broken branches in Lester's yard. Lester paused and looked up. "Raymond Gable. He lived there for nearly 15 years. Quiet. Didn't get close to anyone, but didn't bother anyone either. Every time it snowed, he'd clear the sidewalks for the whole neighborhood. Everyone liked him." Caleb nodded. "Did anyone ever go to his house?" "No, I don't think so. He said his house was full of junk, and he was wary of strangers. Probably just picky." Lester responded slowly. "Did anyone ever see him bring anyone home? Children, for example?" "No. He lived alone. Once I saw a truck come by with materials. Seemed like lumber, cement or something. That was over a decade ago." Caleb said nothing more, but the words lumber, cement stuck in his mind. That afternoon, he went back to the house, bringing Nora to the shed, an old structure built on the edge of the lot. Rusted tin roof, double wooden doors with a padlock on them. He took out the key they'd received from the broker when buying the house, but the padlock was new, different from the other locks. Caleb took the crowbar and lightly pried the lower hinges. After 10 minutes, the door burst open, and a fine layer of dust flew out into the light. Inside was an empty space, a few rotting wooden boxes, a desk covered with cloth, and most importantly, a cement patch in the middle of the floor, noticeably different from the rest. "What do you see?" Nora asked when Caleb bent down close to the floor. "The cement mix here is new, the kind that's mixed later. The rest is concrete poured in the 70s, he answered, pointing to the edge of the patch. "And the cracks, too. If you look closely, you'll see they're fractured, like it's hollow underneath." He took a laser measuring tool out of his tool bag, measuring the depth. There were 3 points, each giving a different depth. But the middle point was about 7 inches shallower than the other 2. Caleb looked up. "There's something under here." At the same time, Nora went back to the living room, reopening the metal trunk. While looking at the lining fabric inside, she noticed a corner of the fabric was tightly folded, almost sewn shut. She undid the thread, and inside was a small piece of paper, crumpled, handwritten in blue ballpoint pen. Jay will never leave me. I kept my word. Nora stepped out into the backyard, holding the piece of paper in front of Caleb. He read it without saying anything, only exhaling. I need confirmation from someone who understands the structure under the cement. Could be an old water tank, or maybe not. That night, Caleb photographed the entire cement floor, noting the measurements and positions. He sent the photos to an old friend, Dylan Mercer, who used to be an explosive ordnance disposal expert and underground structure analyst during the Iraq War. The reply message came at 1 a.m. Floor too thin. Structure has cuts. There's a cavity underneath. Not solid ground. Be careful. Caleb locked his phone, not waking Nora. But for the first time since returning to America, he couldn't sleep. Not because of battlefield memories, but because he knew that feeling, that whatever was waiting beneath that cement wasn't a water tank. Not rats, snakes, or broken pipes. It was something that someone had desperately wanted to hide and had hidden for 15 years. The next morning, just as dawn was breaking, Caleb had already laid out all the equipment in front of the shed. Concrete drill, high-power lamp, masks, safety harness, pocket knife, even a small first aid kit. Everything was arranged in the same order as when he was demolishing bunkers in Helmand. The cold air from the previous night hadn't completely dissipated. The shed floor was still damp. Footsteps on the cement echoed softly in the silence. Nora came out, standing at the door. "Are you sure you need to do this yourself?" Caleb didn't turn around. "I don't want anyone touching it before we know what's in there. The police will wait until we have evidence, and we're standing right on top of it." Caleb marked the 3 measuring points from the night before, choosing the most outermost point to start, the least risky point in case there was a cavity or the floor collapsed. He placed the drill bit at a 45-degree angle and pressed the button. The sound of the drill going through the dry cement was deafening, and dust filled the air. After nearly 20 minutes, the drill bit hit something that wasn't cement, not rock. A dry clang rang out. It was metal. Caleb stopped the machine, scraping away the dust. A thin sheet of steel, joined along the edges, not welded shut, not screwed in place. He switched to the crowbar, prying gently. The steel sheet popped up at one corner. The smell of mildew, rust, and something old wafted up, heavy like the smell of mold sealed in a cabinet for years. Nora raised her hand to cover her nose. "What is that?" Caleb didn't answer. He shone the light into the space below, revealing a hole about 2 meters deep. Below, a wooden staircase stood upright, with no railings, leading straight down into the ground. Caleb put on the headlamp, tightened the safety harness on his belt, attached the hook to the anchor, and carefully stepped down each step of the staircase. The wood creaked gently. Each step was changing the air, cold, thick, and heavy. The room below was narrow, the ceiling low, only enough to walk bent over. The walls were made of old clay bricks, some places covered in white paint, some with red brick. The light shone across, and Caleb stopped. There were scratch marks on the wall. Many long scratches, deep scratches, dried blood clinging in the brick crevices. At the back corner of the room, near the wooden support post, was a person. The girl lay curled up, thin, hair to her waist, clothes torn and ragged, skin as pale as paper. She didn't move, but her eyes were open, wide open, looking straight into the light. Caleb didn't move any further. He raised his hand gently, slowly, his voice low. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." Nora called from above. "What is it?" Caleb answered quickly, not taking his eyes off the girl. "Call 911. She's alive." He stepped closer. In the light, the scars could be seen clearly along her arms, dotted with calluses as if from being chained for a long time. Caleb knelt down. "What's your name?" "Emmy." The girl didn't speak, only trembling. Her lips dry, lightly cracked. Her right hand slowly lifted, very slowly. Then she drew a circle on the dusty floor. Finished, she used her finger to write in a trembling stroke. "Emmy." Nora had reached the bottom, even though Caleb had tried to stop her. She ran over, draped her jacket over the girl's shoulders, holding her gently. "It's okay. It's okay. We won't let anyone hurt you again." Emmy didn't respond. Not crying, no expression besides a dazed look, as if she'd passed the limits of fear, of pain, of hope. 15 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. 2 paramedics climbed down into the bunker using a rope ladder. Emmy was carried up, placed on a stretcher, then taken straight to the Jasper County Hospital in a condition of severe physical exhaustion, dehydration, malnutrition, and a neck muscle injury. That evening, Nora sat by the hospital bed next to Emmy. The girl lay still, her eyes closed, with an IV drip attached. The doctor said Emmy couldn't speak. Her vocal cords had long-term mechanical damage, possibly from impact, strangulation, or screaming for a long time with no response. Nora whispered, "You don't need to speak. We will find out who did this, no matter how long it takes." Emmy opened her eyes, slowly, raising her hand to her neck, touching it lightly, then shaking her head. After that, she drew onto the bedsheet with her fingertip. A hat. Nora was stunned. "A hat?" Emmy nodded lightly. Still the same look. No emotion, no anger. Just as a reminder, the one with the hat locked me up. The next morning, it was lightly raining. Nora stayed at the hospital while Caleb went to the Jasper County Police Station by himself. He brought photos of the bunker, images of Emmy as she was being brought up, and the handwritten line, "Jay will never leave me." The officer on duty, Lieutenant Mallory, listened to him explain all the events of the past 3 days. Caleb didn't beat around the bush. His voice was even, firm, like he was reporting a rescue mission. The man named Raymond Gable lived in that house from 1988 to 2001. The girl we found is Anna Delaney, disappeared in 1987, along with 2 other girls. The files disappeared. The house had a cemented-over bunker. The girl survived, but can't speak. Mallory was silent. He didn't doubt him. The evidence was clear. But like every cop who'd ever handled an old case, he knew what was coming. Complications. Dozens of reports to dig up. Court orders, search warrants, physical evidence, and public opinion. You have the right to go back to the house. But anything you find, you can't remove it from the scene without an investigator present. Agree? Mallory said. Just let me open the wooden desk in the shed. Caleb responded. Around noon, Caleb once again returned to the shed. The police couldn't spare anyone that day, so they only sent a civilian employee to record the scene. He stepped into the old room. Behind layers of dust and cloth was a large old wooden desk, curved legs in a 60s style, sitting silently in the corner. Caleb checked the drawers. All were empty, except the bottom drawer, which seemed loose when pulled out. He bent down, using a small knife to gently pry the bottom edge of the drawer. A click rang out. The whole bottom of the drawer burst off. Underneath was an empty space containing exactly 4 notebooks. Each notebook was thick, with a brown leather cover, carefully wrapped in plastic, labeled with old stickers. L01, L02, L03, L04. Caleb put on gloves, opening the L01 book. The handwriting was clean, even, almost emotionless. No flourishes, no embellishments, only notes. Each page was a detailed record of each action and psychological expression of the 3 girls, recorded by time as if it were a report from a surveillance operation. Day 1. Bethany resisted when the lights were turned off early. Need to limit water intake. Day 4. Emmy was silent for 3 consecutive hours. Good. Day 9. Carla scratched at the door. No dinner, no response to female voice. The L02 book repeated the same behavior, this time clearly recording the schedule. Week 2, September 1987. Emmy reached a quiet state for 6 consecutive hours. Joanie test number 2 failed. No listening. Need to increase the element of isolation. Emmy is the most potential. Joanie. The name started to appear repeatedly in the notes, always linked to models of control, transition, stereotype. There was no one named Joanie in the original case. L03. The notes started to deviate. The handwriting started to become thick and slanted. Some places were crossed out. Carla can't learn, bit me, screamed. Not like Joanie, not like Emmy. Disposed of, 388, ended according to Model 2B. Caleb stopped. Taking a deep breath, he turned to the last page. Only writing. Shouldn't keep it for too long. Emmy will be ruined if touched. But Emmy chose to stay, like Joanie did. He opened the last book, L04, shorter but densely full of calculations. There were diagrams of the bunker, triangles alternating between the stages of silence, eating, resistance. There was a table tracking emotional change by day. At the end of the book, there were only a few lines. Jay always stays. Emmy listens. If anyone finds out, they have to know. Emmy is the closest version. Second level, corpses, cemented. Caleb closed the book, looking up, not saying anything, not looking around. He had understood. Gable didn't just kidnap. He didn't just lock people up. He turned the victims into subjects of psychological experiments. That afternoon, Caleb went back to the hospital, placing the 4 notebooks in front of Nora as she sat next to Emmy. He quietly recounted each line he'd read, not removing anything, not leaving out any details. Nora bit her lip, her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was calm. Carla didn't run away like they said. Caleb nodded. He wrote, disposed of in March '88, the same time Carla disappeared from the files and was said to have left home with a boyfriend. Nora looked towards Emmy. The girl didn't move, but her eyes opened, looking at the ceiling. Caleb said, I need to ask you something. Seriously. Nora turned back. What is it? I will dig up the cement on the left side of the bunker, without informing the police first. If there is a body there, we'll have enough evidence to charge Gable. If not, we'll be seen as vandals. Nora didn't hesitate. I'll come with you. Before dawn had fully broken, Caleb was standing in the hospital hallway, phone pressed to his ear, eyes staring intently at the white wall in front. "Lieutenant Mallory, I have in my hands a diagram that clearly marks the burial place." "Burial? What are you waiting for?" On the other end of the line, Mallory sighed. "You're saying that under there's still someone there?" "It's not wanting, it's knowing for sure. Did you not see the note at the end of the book? Second basement, corpse cemented over. The person who drew this diagram is also the one who imprisoned Emmy for 14 years. Do you need a higher probability?" Silence. Then Mallory spoke softly. "I don't have authorization. Digging without authorization is illegal." Caleb gritted his teeth. "I used to pull my teammates' bodies from helicopter wreckage in Ghazni. I know the smell of a place with a human body. The smell of iron, deck, and something that isn't in cement. Don't tell me this is just intuition." Both were silent for a few seconds. Then Mallory conceded. "Give me 2 hours. I'll get a team down there and take gas samples. If there's signs of organic gas, you'll have authorization to dig." 9:17 a.m. The first forensics vehicle rolled onto the dirt path behind Caleb and Nora's house. 3 people in protective suits got out of the car, carrying gas measuring equipment, probe cameras, and quick test kits. One of them, a female forensic scientist named Lydia, inserted the measuring device into a small hole that Caleb had drilled the day before, right at the edge of the second block of cement. The results came up after less than 30 seconds. There's decane and trimethylamine readings. There's definitely organic decomposition. And it's old. Caleb folded his arms, nodding. "I told you." That afternoon, Mallory came to the scene himself. Under his supervision and that of the forensics team, the engineering team broke up the cement according to the diagram written in the L04 book. The second level wasn't much deeper, only about 1.3 meters, but wider and lined with rough bricks. When they finished digging through the top layer, the forensics shovel hit something hard but fragile. A dry click. Everyone was silent. "Not rock?" Lydia said softly. They started using their hands, gently, layer by layer, tiny fragments of cement. 20 minutes later, 2 human skeletons were exposed. Not intact, but enough to see the size. Teenagers, female. One set showed signs of a broken left rib. Another still wore a silver chain around its neck. The forensics team carefully removed the chain, holding it up to the light. On the inside of the pendant was engraved, "C. Monroe." Caleb tightened his fist. No need to wait for DNA testing. He knew it was Carla Monroe, the stubborn girl that Gable wrote in L03 was disposed of. 388. Mallory breathed heavily. "So you were right. Not just one girl, all 3. "No," Caleb responded, his eyes looking down into the burial pit. 2 bodies, 1 survivor. But there's also Joanie. He mentioned Joanie more than the 3 girls. Lydia looked up. "Joanie isn't on the summer camp list." "Exactly," Caleb nodded. "Joanie isn't a victim. Joanie is something else. A shadow, or the root of all this." As the workers started clearing the ground on the left side of the basement, someone suddenly called out, "There's something here!" A metal box, small, close to the wall. The whole team stopped. The box was pulled up, about the size of a hand, wrapped in thick plastic, stuck tight as if it had been pressed in wet concrete. They cleaned the outside, finding a faded silver label on top. J doesn't leave. J is real. Caleb looked at the box. Is there a lock? No, just sealed shut. But there's some kind of sound vibrating inside. They used a knife to split and peel back the plastic. Inside was a small cassette tape, the kind popular in the late 80s. Nora stood by her side. Her hand trembled slightly. Do you think this is a real recording of Joanie? Caleb looked at her. I think we're finally about to find out who Joanie is. The police immediately sealed the tape to take it to the lab. But that night, Mallory called Caleb personally. Do you still have a cassette player? Caleb replied, I do. Mallory's voice slowed. Then tomorrow night, just the two of us, we'll listen to it first. The next day, the Jasper County Police Department press briefing room was packed. Camera lights flashed. The front row was full of reporters from local TV stations, holding notebooks and microphones. The police chief stood behind a wooden podium, leaning into the microphone, speaking clearly. We are focusing on finding a person named Joanie Delaney, possibly the half-sister of the victim, Anna Delaney, and someone we suspect is connected to the imprisonment and abuse of the other two girls. A composite sketch of a woman in her 30s, dark hair, deep eyes, a cold expression, was displayed behind him, based on descriptions from the notebooks and unverified information. Among the audience, Caleb sat silently. His hand tightened on the edge of the chair, his jaw clenched so hard the muscles stood out. In the next seat, Nora whispered, Joanie Delaney? Are they giving a fictional character a last name? Caleb nodded slightly. His eyes didn't leave the podium. As he'd predicted, the police had completely misunderstood. That night, at Caleb's house, he placed the duplicated cassette tape on the table, along with the audio transcript that Mallory had given him. Both sat together and listened again, for the second time, to the only audible section on the tape. On the tape, a man's voice rang out, hoarse and even, almost hypnotic. Joanie, sit down now. Joanie, be good. Don't make Daddy sad. Joanie, come back. There was no child's voice, no sound of resistance, only repeating those same phrases. Joanie, sit down. Joanie, be good. The first time he'd heard it, Mallory had thought it was proof that Joanie had existed. Maybe she'd lived with Raymond. Maybe she was the original perpetrator. But Caleb saw something different. He opened the L-Zo-O-1 book again, quickly turning the pages until he stopped at a line of handwritten words that had been crossed out. Joanie will return when Emmy is clean enough. Caleb placed his hand on the page. The short words opened up a truth. Joanie wasn't a real person. Joanie was a model. The personality that Raymond was imposing on the girls. A distorted memory. A shadow placed upon the victim. Emmy isn't Emmy to him, Caleb said to Nora, his voice lowered. To him, Emmy is Joanie. And what he's doing isn't to torture them. It's to turn the girls into a new version of Joanie. Nora was silent. So, who is Joanie? Did he know someone with that name in real life? Caleb stood up. It can only be someone who left a deep crack. Someone he couldn't control. 2 days later, while the press throughout the state was excitedly reporting about the search for Joanie Delaney, Caleb drove alone to the Newton County Central Library, where paper files were kept from old medical facilities, including the Mount Hill Mental Institution, which had been closed in 1985 due to lawsuits related to patient abuse. With military documents and a phone call from Mallory for support, Caleb was allowed to access the old personnel files. Each file was faded, the spine cracking. He looked through each page. Finally, in the 1983 files, under the section for part-time contract nurses, a name appeared. Joanie Fisher, night shift nurse, Mount Hill Institute. No photo, no criminal record. But there was a note. Resigned in June/83, no reason given. Note. Previously sent personal letters by patient Raymond Gable. Content shows dependency. Request to be reassigned after an incident in room 14. Caleb stopped. Sweat broke out on the back of his neck. Raymond Gable had been a patient. Joanie had been a nurse, not a lover. Not an accomplice. But the source of the obsession. The only woman Raymond tried to hold on to, but couldn't. He took that name, Joanie, and forced it onto every child he locked up. Turned them into a former person. Replayed the old script, over and over, for 14 years. Caleb hurried back to the parking lot, pulling out his phone to call Mallory. I know who Joanie is, and you need to hear this before you go on TV again. On the other end of the line, Mallory paused. Caleb tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Joanie was never a criminal. She was the shadow this patient could never shake off. You're investigating the wrong person. Joanie Fisher, night shift nurse, Mount Hill Institute. Disappeared in March 1983. There's a complaint about Raymond Gable before she disappeared. On the other side, Mallory was silent for a few seconds before replying slowly. That's a theory, not proof. And there's no criminal record saying Gable was ever treated at Mount Hill. You need to review how they covered up the incident. I'm going to find the internal treatment record, the original disciplinary record. It may be kept in paper form in a file basement. Mount Hill closed in 1985. All the data hasn't been digitized. You don't have the right to enter a medical record store unsupervised. Well then, Mallory, you should find a way for me to do that. Mallory was silent before firing back in a stern tone. Keep this low profile. And hung up. 10 a.m., Caleb returned to the basement archive of the Newton Library. In his hand was a note about Joanie Fisher's sudden resignation. The librarian named Amelia, a young girl with a quiet voice and thick glasses, lowered her voice immediately when she saw the name Joanie. You said Joanie Fisher used to work at Mount Hill? Yes. Wait here. I saw a box of disciplinary files mixed in with the Institute Dissolution section. It's not in the public access catalog. 10 minutes later, she returned, holding an old file. The binding cord faded. Caleb opened it. The smell of damp paper filled the air. The first line was blurred but clear enough to read. Internal record. February 1983. Complainant, Joanie Fisher, night shift nurse. Allegation, Raymond Gable, patient in room 14, repeatedly followed me, touched my body, and locked me in a storage room in the basement for 3 hours on February 19th. Action. Joanie suspended for 1 week for investigation. Conclusion. Insufficient evidence. Case closed on February 28th. Caleb tightened his grip on the paper. He turned the page. The last page read, Official resignation date, 3/3/1983. Personal note, I'm not coming back, I'm afraid of him, JF. But at the very bottom was a strange line. Different handwriting. Joanie disappeared on 3/14/1983. Investigation closed in May. Conclusion, possible suicide. No body found. Caleb hissed through his teeth. No body. just like Carla and Bethany before they were dug up. A repeating pattern, and this time, Joanie was the starting point. He returned to Jasper that afternoon and presented the file to Mallory. The lieutenant read each line slowly. His expression became heavier. Gable was a mental patient. He attacked a nurse, was ignored. Then Joanie disappeared, no body, also in 1983. Then he disappeared for 3 years, then suddenly bought a house on Red Fern in 1988, right after the 3 girls disappeared. Caleb said softly, Joanie was an obsession he couldn't control. He wouldn't let her leave, so he created copies. Emmy was the closest version, but Joanie never came back because she was dead. Mallory sighed, placing the file down. What do you have to prove she was killed, not suicide? Caleb shook his head. Not yet. No body. But if we find where Joanie was hidden, the first place, it might be enough. Mallory said nothing, but his eyes were no longer as doubtful as before. That same evening at the town hospital, Nora sat next to Emmy. The girl had gradually recovered physically, but still couldn't speak. Instead, she drew. Every time Nora gave her paper and pencil, Emmy carefully drew each line as if imprinted from memory. Today, she drew a 6-petaled flower, fine and even lines. Then wrote a single word below, Mount Hill. Nora was stunned. She flipped through the book of drawings Emmy had made. None of them had words. This was the first time the girl had written the name of a place. Caleb entered the room just as Nora held up the drawing. He looked closely at the 6-petaled flower. It wasn't a random decoration. It was the old logo of the Mount Hill Mental Institution. Caleb said softly, as if confirming what he had always suspected. She saw it. Raymond showed Emmy the files. Maybe even more. He told her about Joanie. About Mother Joanie, Sister Joanie, or someone who always stayed. Emmy isn't just a victim. She's a witness. Caleb stared at the drawing. If she knows about Mount Hill, then maybe Joanie's body was never taken from there. He looked up at Nora. I'm going back there. This time, to dig up the past from the very place it started. While checking medical records at the hospital, Nora happened to discover a strange patient code that matched the 1987 disappearance file. The name Emmy turned out to never have existed. Late afternoon, October 22nd, Nora sat alone in the Jasper Hospital record room. In her hand was a patient file that Emmy's treating doctor had agreed to show her, on the condition of absolute confidentiality. In the upper corner of the first page, the handwritten phrase, declared name, Emmy, no last name. She turned to the blood test section and the original file code temporarily stored by the Institute. It was a temporary code consisting of 3 letters and a series of numbers. AD 8724. Nora paused. AD? She looked up, her heart beating faster. She quickly pulled out her purse, taking out a photo of the old newspaper from August 17, 1987, the copy they found at the library. The list of missing victims printed in bold: Anna Delaney, Bethany Cooper, Carla Monroe, Anna Delaney, A.D. That evening, at home, Caleb listened intently as Nora recounted her discovery. He opened the L04 notebook, turning to the last lines where Raymond wrote in a scrawl. Emmy listens better than A. A left, but Emmy stayed. Caleb murmured, not 2 people, just one. He turned back to the L01 book, the first notes from the early days when Gable imprisoned the girls. Anna doesn't want to call me Dad. She keeps screaming Joanie. I told her Joanie isn't here. Caleb dropped the notebook. His eyes met Nora's. Emmy isn't the fourth child. There is no fourth child. She's Anna. The next morning, Mallory directly requested a DNA comparison between Emmy's blood sample and the DNA sample of Anna Delaney's birth mother, which had been taken in 1987 and stored. Result? 99.96% match. The girl who survived after 14 years of imprisonment in the basement wasn't Emmy. That was just the name Raymond made up. A new personality, a compliant shell. Her real name was Anna Delaney. At a press conference 3 days later, Mallory announced the full details of the case. We confirmed that the total number of victims in the Green Hollow case in 1987 was 3. 2 have been found and confirmed dead. The remaining one, Anna Delaney, has been rescued. The name Emmy was a nickname created by the suspect Raymond Gable during her imprisonment. That evening, Anna sat on a wooden chair on the back porch of Caleb and Nora's house, the dim moonlight shining on her hair. Caleb came out, gently placing a cup of tea next to the chair. She said nothing, but when their eyes met, Anna nodded slightly. For the first time, she wasn't looking at the floor, not drawing, just looking straight at him. Caleb sat down. We know now, he said softly. Your name is Anna. She blinked slightly, her lips pressed together. Then, very slowly, Anna raised her hand to her chest, pointing to herself. But then, the little girl drew Emmy inside a heart. Caleb didn't understand, but complied to it that she might like that name more. So they still called her Emmy. The hospital room was still quiet. Nora stood by the window, her hand gripping Emmy's drawing of the 6-petaled flower. Caleb sat close to the bed, his eyes never leaving the girl. She still hadn't spoken, but every time someone mentioned Joanie, those eyes twitched. Outside the hallway, Lieutenant Mallory walked in quickly, holding a new file. He handed it straight to Caleb, his voice hoarse. We rechecked Raymond Gable's entire record through the federal system. And guess what? We didn't find any registered deaths under his name. Caleb stood up abruptly. You mean, there's no real death certificate? It's all forged documents. The signature of the person who signed the death was from a doctor who died 4 years ago. We also traced the social security number. Gable had been living undercover as Martin Glass at a nursing home called Camp.19, just east of the state. Caleb frowned. Right after leaving Red Fern? Mallory nodded. Exactly 1 year after selling your house. He entered that facility with fake medical records, saying he had cognitive impairment after a mild stroke. And for the past 2 years, no one visited. No family papers. No real address. Caleb was silent. The feeling in his heart now was just one. Gable had never intended to die. He just retreated into the shadows. Mallory continued, his voice lowering. 2 days after we were on TV talking about the Green Hollow case, his room in Camp.19 was empty. No personal belongings, just... He pulled a transparent evidence bag from his coat pocket. Inside was a pair of dark canvas shoes with red mud on the soles. Caleb picked them up. The mud was still damp. He immediately recognized the distinct red color. Jasper County soil. Mallory nodded. He left the facility before dawn. The security camera footage is blurry, but the figure is very similar, which means he's going back to where it all started. Nora was still sitting next to Emmy, observing her every small movement. When Caleb entered, carrying the evidence bag, she just looked at him without needing to ask. Caleb squeezed his wife's hand. He's alive, and he's going back to find Joanie. Nora repeated softly, "Joanie isn't there." "No," Caleb replied, "but to him, Joanie never left." 19 years. The Green Hollow case spanned nearly 2 decades, from the summer of 1987 to the fall of 2006. 4 girls were harmed, 3 went missing, 2 bodies were found, 1 survived. And behind it all was a single person, Raymond Gable. Noon on October 18th, after more than 3 weeks of intensive investigation, federal police coordinated with the Jasper County Special Investigation Unit and surrounded Raymond in an abandoned wooden house near the edge of the Green Hollow Forest, only about a mile from where the summer camp was held in '87. Caleb was in the team. When they rushed in, Raymond was sitting alone on the floor, holding a cracked photo frame. Inside was a photo of a young brunette girl wearing a nurse uniform, Joanie Fisher. He didn't resist, nor was he panicked. He just looked up, smiling faintly. "I'm still waiting." Interrogation room, 10 a.m. the next day. Caleb was allowed to participate in the special interrogation. The room was sealed, the lights dim yellow. Raymond sat opposite him, thin, hunched over, his eyes still drifting between reality and dream. But his hands still trembled steadily, not because of illness, but because of a distorted memory that had never left. Caleb gently placed a photo on the table. "She's right here." Raymond looked up. His eyes stopped on the picture of Joanie Fisher, the only copy taken in 1983, the day she was hired as a nurse at the Mount Hill Institute. She was smiling, still very young, still unaware that she would become a lifelong obsession of a mental patient. Raymond didn't look away. He laughed softly, almost talking to himself. "She doesn't age, but I do." The police were about to interrupt the interrogation because they thought Raymond was in a delusional state, useless for questioning. But Caleb maintained his composure, calmly evoking each layer of memory. And then Raymond himself, without coercion, said, "She doesn't forgive." Laying still very much, my Joanie. Behind the shed behind Old Mount Hill, right on the edge of the forest, where there's red clay soil. I kept her there. 2 days later, the forensics team went to that spot. Under the clay soil, inside a bag that had been almost completely calcified, they found the human remains. Dental analysis and a silver ring engraved with JF81 confirmed. Joanie Fisher disappeared in 1983. 1 week later, the one-way mirror room. Emmy stood silently, looking inside. On the other side was Raymond Gable, now placed under special supervision at a state mental facility. Caleb stood behind her, saying nothing. Raymond whispered, his lips barely moving. But the mic picked it up. "Joanie still doesn't forgive me." Emmy didn't react. She didn't cry. The little girl only placed her hand on the glass, then turned away. Raymond Gable, the person who created a living prison underground, who trained 3 girls like a personality experiment, was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole at the North Vale High Security Mental Facility. Joanie Fisher was brought back to her hometown in Michigan, buried next to her family. Carla Monroe and Bethany Cooper were identified and received justice after more than 18 years of being considered runaways. The next morning, Police Chief Mallory stood up to speak. On behalf of the entire Special Investigation Force, I would like to announce the official result of the case named Green Hollow after more than 19 years of investigation and pursuit. Duration of the case. The disappearance occurred on the night of August 15, 1987. The last victim was found on October 19, 2006. Total, 19 years, 2 months. Number of victims. A total of 4 people, including 3 kidnapped Femont girls and 1 deceased, had found her remains. Carla Monroe died in 1988. Her body was found under a layer of cement at the Red Fern shed. Bethany Cooper died in about 1989 at the same location. Anna Delaney, alive, found in September 2006 in a secret underground bunker. Imprisoned for 14 years under the false identity Emmy. The villain, Raymond Gable, 72 years old, formerly a patient at the Mount Hill Mental Institution, used the alias Martin Glass for the last 5 years of his life. Arrested on 10/18/2006, had created false death certificates, hidden his identity, and lived hidden under many other legal identities. Total number of bodies found: 3 bodies: Bethany Cooper, Carla Monroe, and Joanie Fisher. Nurse disappeared in 1983, was the first victim killed and the root of the suspect's obsession. Forms of imprisonment. The girls were held in a closed bunker built under the shed, without exposure to sunlight, subject to strict behavioral controls, recorded in detail in manual notebooks like a depraved training system. Condition of the surviving victim, Anna Delaney, alias Emmy, is currently receiving medical care and psychological treatment. Condition is stable, although she has lost the ability to speak due to prolonged vocal cord damage. Official charges: kidnapping, first-degree murder, falsifying evidence, using false documents, unlawful imprisonment, severe abuse of minors. The crime will not be pardoned. Declared unfit for ordinary trials, but imprisoned for life in a high-security mental institution. The Green Hollow case is now closed. If this story has made you stop for a moment, to listen, to feel, or simply to breathe more slowly, please send it to a friend via WhatsApp. Maybe it's someone who's looking for a part of their past. Maybe it's someone who once thought they had been forgotten. Or maybe they just need to be reminded that some pains will not be in vain if we dare to look them in the face. We cannot return anyone to the past, but we can tell the story together so that no one else has to disappear in silence. Please send this story. Who knows, somewhere someone is needing it at the right time.